You could prepare every meal, organize every date, send every thoughtful good morning message, and reshape your entire life to make someone happy, yet an avoidant may still pull away. Sighs. That does not automatically mean you failed. It does not mean you are not enough. More often than not, it reflects something buried so deeply inside them that they may not even recognize it themselves. Curious. Today, we're going to unpack that hidden pattern, because once you understand what an avoidant is truly loyal to, every confusing cycle begins to make sense. The mixed signals, the hot and cold behavior, the sudden distance, the disappearing acts, and all those relationships that never seem to fully become real. If you've been searching for this answer, leave the word loyal in the comments. And if you're interested in understanding human psychology beyond the surface, subscribe to Avoidants. We don't settle for simple dating tips here. We explore the deeper psychological truth behind human behavior. Let me begin with something that may be difficult to accept. The avoidant person in your life does not experience love the same way you do. That isn't criticism, and it isn't meant to shame them. It is simply the reality of how their emotional world operates. The sooner you truly accept that, not just logically but emotionally, the sooner you'll stop exhausting yourself trying to earn something from someone whose internal wiring functions very differently from yours. This is where so many people get trapped. They spend years trying to discover the perfect formula that will finally make the avoidant stay. They convince themselves that if they become less emotional, more patient, more independent, more available, more distant, warmer, calmer, or somehow better, everything will finally work. So they constantly adjust themselves, they give more space, then they try giving less. They become more affectionate, then less affectionate. They analyze every conversation, every text, every silence, hoping to uncover the one mistake that pushed the avoidant away. For a while, things often seem promising. The avoidant becomes more open. They move a little closer. They share more than usual and may even speak about a future together. Then, almost without warning, everything changes. The distance returns. Communication fades. The emotional walls go back up. Naturally, you begin asking yourself what happened. Was it something you said? Something you overlooked? Did you become too much? Did you expect too much? In most cases, the answer is no. The real issue was never centered on you. It comes from something much deeper inside the avoidant's emotional system. To understand their behavior, you have to understand what they protect above everything else. They are not primarily loyal to the relationship. They are not primarily loyal to another person. Surprisingly, they are often not even loyal to their own long-term happiness. Their deepest loyalty is to one thing alone, their emotional sense of safety. That changes everything. When most people hear the word safety, they imagine emotional closeness. They think of trust, vulnerability, honesty, and feeling secure enough to let another person into their heart. Healthy intimacy feels safe because connection creates comfort. But an avoidant experiences safety through a completely different lens. For them, safety often means distance rather than closeness. It means preserving independence, relying on themselves, and avoiding emotional dependence on anyone else. Feeling completely in control of their inner world gives them relief, and that sense of control becomes incredibly difficult to surrender. This is the foundation beneath nearly every confusing behavior you have witnessed. They are not choosing hobbies instead of you. They are not choosing work, solitude, or independence because they secretly despise commitment. They choose those things because those environments feel emotionally predictable. They know how to function there. Those spaces don't activate the same internal alarms that deep intimacy does. Meanwhile, if you naturally crave closeness, emotional honesty, and genuine connection, you unintentionally represent the very experience their nervous system has learned to interpret as dangerous. Not because you are toxic, not because you are asking for too much, not because you have done anything wrong, but because true emotional closeness itself can register as a threat inside someone whose nervous system learned long ago that dependence leads to pain. Pause and really let that sink in. To them, intimacy can feel unsafe. That is the invisible battle taking place beneath the relationship. And no amount of love, sacrifice, or reassurance can convince someone's nervous system to stop treating closeness as a threat until they are willing to confront and heal the beliefs driving that response. You cannot prepare enough amazing meals. You cannot send enough heartfelt texts. You cannot love harder, give more, or become more patient in hopes of making someone stop feeling threatened by the very closeness you're offering. That simply is not how this works. This is one of the most heartbreaking realities of loving an avoidant. The more genuine your affection becomes, the more their internal alarm can begin to activate. The more consistently you show up, the more they instinctively step back. The harder you work to bridge the emotional gap, the more space they often create between you. None of this is meant as a personal rejection, yet it feels deeply personal when you're living through it. Few experiences are more painful than giving someone your best, believing you're doing everything right, and still watching them drift away. That emotional confusion is what leaves so many people feeling exhausted, questioning their worth, and wondering what they could have done differently. But if you only understand the behavior, you'll miss the real story. To truly make sense of avoidant attachment, you have to look beneath the actions and understand where they began. Avoidant attachment isn't something people are simply born with, nor is it evidence that someone is incapable of love. It is a survival strategy that usually develops during childhood. It forms in environments where emotional needs were repeatedly overlooked, minimized, criticized, or met with inconsistency. Imagine being a young child reaching for comfort and receiving emotional distance instead. Imagine expressing sadness only to be told you're too sensitive or that your feelings don't matter. Imagine looking to the people you depend on most, only to discover that emotional closeness isn't available when you need it. A child living through those experiences begins drawing powerful conclusions about the world. They learn that relying on other people can lead to disappointment. They learn that vulnerability often brings pain instead of comfort. They slowly convince themselves that the safest way to survive is to expect less, need less, and depend on no one emotionally. At the time, this strategy is incredibly effective. It protects them from repeated hurt. It allows them to function in an environment that cannot consistently meet their emotional needs. Their independence becomes their armor. The difficulty is that childhood eventually ends, life changes, relationships change, but the protective strategy often remains exactly the same. Now that child has become an adult whose nervous system has spent years linking emotional intimacy with danger, the programming continues automatically, even when the circumstances are completely different. Then one day, they meet someone who genuinely cares for them, someone warm, emotionally available, and capable of offering the kind of connection they secretly long for. And they do long for it. Despite what many people believe, avoidants are not empty or incapable of love. Deep down, they crave closeness just like anyone else. They don't dream of spending their lives emotionally isolated. A part of them desperately wants connection. At first, everything feels exciting. They allow themselves to get closer than usual. They experience emotions they may have buried for years. Hope begins to grow. But as the relationship deepens, another part of them begins sounding the alarm. That alarm isn't based on logic. It isn't persuaded by reassurance. It doesn't disappear because someone loves them well. It reacts to perceived danger. And for their nervous system, deep emotional closeness has long been classified as exactly that. So their survival programming immediately takes over. They begin creating distance. They suddenly become busy. Communication slows down. They withdraw emotionally. Small imperfections in you suddenly seem enormous. Doubts about the relationship begin appearing where certainty once existed. They convince themselves that maybe you're incompatible, maybe the timing is wrong, maybe they aren't ready, or maybe something important is missing. Here's what many people misunderstand. When an avoidant says these things, they usually believe them in that moment. They aren't necessarily manipulating you or deliberately inventing excuses. Their brain is actively searching for reasons to justify creating distance, because distance feels safer than vulnerability. From their perspective, pulling away genuinely appears to be the reasonable decision. Their nervous system isn't trying to destroy the relationship. It's trying to protect them from a threat it learned to recognize many years ago. So when they withdraw, it often isn't a calculated game or a conscious attempt to cause pain. They're following emotional programming that has been operating since childhood. They're remaining loyal to the internal system that once kept them emotionally safe. That system doesn't evaluate how much you've sacrificed. It doesn't consider the memories you've built together. It doesn't stop to appreciate your patience, your loyalty, or your love. Its only job is protection, and it was created long before you ever entered their life, during a time when they were small, vulnerable, and doing whatever they could to survive emotionally. This leads to one of the biggest misunderstandings people make after learning about avoidant attachment, and it's a mistake that quietly steals years from countless lives if they aren't careful. Once people understand how avoidant attachment develops, they often make a mistake that quietly keeps them trapped. They tell themselves, "Now I finally understand why they behave this way. If I become more patient, more understanding, give them even more space, and love them more gently, eventually they'll feel safe enough to stay." At first, that sounds compassionate. It feels generous. It feels like unconditional love. But there is an important difference between compassion and sacrificing yourself, and many people confuse the two. When every adjustment comes from your side while the other person remains exactly the same, that isn't healthy patience anymore. It's self-abandonment disguised as understanding. Let's be clear about something. Avoidant people are absolutely capable of growth. They are not damaged beyond hope. They are not incapable of loving deeply or building secure relationships. Lasting change is possible. But that transformation has to come from them. It requires genuine effort, not simply remaining in a relationship while someone else carries all the emotional weight. It means therapy, honest self-reflection, learning healthier patterns, taking responsibility, and consistently working through the fears that have shaped their relationships for years. Without that work, nothing truly changes. What doesn't create healing is endlessly waiting. It isn't constantly reshaping yourself. It isn't becoming quieter, asking for less, accepting less, or convincing yourself that painful behavior is acceptable simply because you understand where it comes from. Knowing why someone struggles doesn't obligate you to carry the consequences of those struggles forever. Recognizing the source of another person's emotional distance does not require you to live with that distance. Those are two completely different realities. Unfortunately, many people blend them together. Once they learn about attachment wounds, they begin believing it's now their responsibility to heal those wounds through endless patience. But that simply isn't how healing works. No one can repair another person's attachment system on their behalf. No amount of love can erase decades of nervous system conditioning that has taught someone to associate intimacy with danger. Real change begins only when the avoidant themselves decides they no longer want to live inside those patterns. It begins when they actively seek help, remain committed to growth, and continue doing the uncomfortable work over time, not because someone waited long enough, but because they chose a different way of living. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful dynamics in avoidant relationships, the cycle that keeps so many people emotionally trapped. If you've loved an avoidant, you probably know exactly what this feels like. They pull away. You immediately feel the absence of their affection, attention, and warmth. Your anxiety grows. You reach out more. You try harder. You search for the perfect words, hoping to restore the closeness that suddenly disappeared. From there, one of two things usually happens. Either they remain distant, leaving you feeling increasingly anxious and emotionally overwhelmed, or they return. Suddenly they're affectionate again. They text, they call, they become warm, present, and emotionally available. And when that happens, the emotional relief is overwhelming. After fearing you were losing them, having them close again feels almost euphoric. Your brain experiences that reunion as an enormous reward. Then before long, they withdraw once more. The pattern repeats. Over time, something subtle but incredibly powerful begins happening inside you. Your attention slowly becomes organized around them. Your nervous system starts waiting for the next moment of closeness. Small gestures suddenly carry enormous emotional weight. A single text can completely change your day. A brief moment of affection feels like proof that everything is finally getting better. Without realizing it, your emotional world begins revolving around someone else's availability. Your mood rises and falls depending on theirs. Your confidence depends on how they respond. Your sense of peace depends on whether they're emotionally close or emotionally distant. Meanwhile, the avoidance nervous system continues operating exactly as it always has. They move closer when closeness feels comfortable. They create distance when it feels overwhelming. They unconsciously regulate the relationship according to their own emotional tolerance, controlling how much connection exists at any given moment, and you remain inside the cycle. Not because you're weak, not because you're foolish, but because this pattern is genuinely addictive. Psychologically, unpredictable rewards are among the strongest reinforcers the human brain can experience. The uncertainty, the emotional highs, the painful lows, and the intermittent moments of connection activate reward pathways that closely resemble those involved in behavioral addictions. No one designed this cycle to trap you, yet that's exactly what it often does. Breaking free starts with recognizing the pattern for what it is. You have to see it clearly, give it a name, and make the difficult decision to stop participating in it. That choice is rarely easy. When you're deeply attached, walking away doesn't initially feel like freedom. It feels like grief. It feels like losing someone you genuinely love. It feels as though you're abandoning them when they need understanding the most. But in reality, you're doing something very different. You're choosing to honor yourself. You're recognizing that your need for dependable love, emotional consistency, and genuine connection deserves just as much respect as another person's need to feel emotionally safe. Your needs are not excessive. Wanting closeness is not a character flaw. Wanting reliability is not being needy. Those are healthy, deeply human needs, and you never have to apologize for having them. You deserve to build a relationship with someone who is capable of meeting those emotional needs. Not someone who is perfect, because no one is, but someone who consistently chooses the relationship even when things become uncomfortable. Someone who feels the urge to withdraw, but communicates instead. Someone who recognizes unhealthy patterns, accepts responsibility for them, and actively works with you instead of keeping you permanently at the emotional distance that feels safest to them. Before we finish, I want to make something very clear. This isn't about attacking or blaming avoidant people. I don't believe avoidants are villains. I believe many of them are carrying unresolved emotional pain. The behaviors that hurt the people who love them often hurt them just as deeply. From the outside, they can appear completely unaffected. They may look independent, confident, and perfectly content on their own, but appearances rarely tell the whole story. Beneath that calm exterior, many avoidants experience an intense loneliness they struggle to acknowledge. A part of them genuinely longs for closeness, yet they've spent years burying that desire so deeply that they sometimes lose conscious access to it. They tell themselves they don't need anyone. They convince themselves they're happier alone. But there's a difference between truly preferring solitude and becoming disconnected from your own emotional needs. Many avoidants have become so skilled at suppressing those needs that they only resurface during life's quietest moments, when there are no distractions, no work, no obligations, and no one else around. In those moments, an unexplained emptiness often emerges, a longing that doesn't seem to fit the independent identity they've built. That quiet ache is simply the human part of them asking for what every person ultimately wants: to love and be loved, to belong, to feel emotionally safe, to be deeply understood, and to know they are accepted despite their imperfections. The desire is there, the fear is simply stronger. And when fear controls someone's life, everyone involved eventually suffers. That reality deserves compassion. But compassion should never require sacrificing your own emotional health. You can understand why someone behaves the way they do, while also recognizing that staying in the relationship is no longer healthy for you. Those two truths can exist side by side. Now let's move beyond understanding and focus on what you can actually do. First, stop trying to love harder every time they create distance. When someone withdraws, your instinct may be to give more, to become more available, more patient, more supportive, hoping they'll finally recognize your value. But repeatedly responding to distance by overgiving only keeps the cycle alive. Without realizing it, you're teaching the relationship that every time they step back, you'll move even closer. Their nervous system feels temporarily safer, while yours becomes increasingly exhausted. Healthy relationships aren't built on one person carrying all the emotional responsibility. Real connection requires both people to participate. Second, become completely honest about what you need. Not what you've convinced yourself is reasonable because of who they are. Not what you've settled for. Ask yourself what genuinely makes you feel emotionally secure, appreciated, respected, and loved. Write those needs down if necessary. Speak them out loud. Stop apologizing for having them. Then ask yourself one difficult question. Is this relationship meeting those needs today? Not someday. Not after years of potential growth. Not if everything finally changes. Right now. If the answer is no, that's valuable information. Not something to ignore, but something to honor. Third, redirect the energy you've been investing in understanding them back toward yourself. Think about how much time you've spent analyzing their behavior, anticipating their moods, researching attachment styles, adjusting your communication, and searching for the perfect way to reach them. Now imagine giving even half of that attention to your own life. Invest in your growth, reconnect with friends, pursue passions you've neglected, create experiences that have nothing to do with waiting for someone else's emotional availability. Something remarkable begins happening when you do. You remember who you are outside the relationship. You reconnect with parts of yourself that slowly disappeared while your world revolved around someone else's emotional rhythm. And naturally, you become less available for unhealthy cycles, not as a strategy to make them chase you, but because you're genuinely living a fuller life. That isn't manipulation, it's emotional health. Finally, stop trying to convince someone to understand feelings they're unwilling or unable to hear. Healthy communication matters. Expressing your needs matters. But there's a difference between communicating and constantly pleading for basic emotional reciprocity. If you find yourself repeatedly defending your feelings, explaining why they matter, or trying to prove you're worthy of love, the relationship has already moved into unhealthy territory. The right partner won't require you to argue for your value. One of the most powerful decisions you can make is becoming willing to let go of a relationship that consistently fails to meet your emotional needs. Not as an ultimatum, not as a tactic, but as an act of self-respect. Sometimes genuine consequences become the only thing that causes an avoidant to honestly examine their own behavior. Sometimes they choose to grow, sometimes they choose to walk away. Either way, you gain something priceless: clarity, and clarity allows healing to begin. Remember, not every relationship enters your life to last forever. Some arrive to reveal your own patterns. They show you where you've ignored your boundaries, accepted less than you deserve, or abandoned yourself in order to keep someone else comfortable. If you repeatedly find yourself drawn to emotionally unavailable partners, ask yourself an even deeper question: where did that pattern begin inside you? Because the greatest transformation doesn't come only from understanding avoidant psychology. It comes from understanding your own. Many people mistake emotional uncertainty for passion. They confuse the anxiety of chasing someone with chemistry. But secure love feels entirely different. It feels peaceful, reliable, consistent. You aren't left wondering where you stand because you already know. Healthy love doesn't ask you to become smaller. It doesn't require you to silence your needs or constantly earn your place. It gives you room to become more of yourself, not less. You deserve someone who chooses you through consistent actions instead of occasional moments of closeness. So stop chasing people who continually move away. Stop accepting emotional leftovers and calling them love. Choose loyalty to your own well-being before seeking loyalty from anyone else. The moment you truly believe your needs matter just as much as theirs, your relationships begin to change. You stop overextending yourself. You create space for genuine reciprocity. And most importantly, you make room for the kind of love that doesn't leave you questioning your worth. It reminds you of it.